So, we are here in the beautiful city of Chiang Mai for the Roots Asia Conference, and I'm joined here by Tom Reich, who is Air Service Development and Retention Director for the Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority, also known as MWAA.
Yes.
Tom, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
My first question for you is, how is the recovery of your airports actually going? Are you back to full service just yet?
So yes, we have two airports at our airports authority, Reagan National and Dulles International. And Reagan National is back to full pre-pandemic 2019 passenger levels. Dulles International, on the other hand, is still lagging a little bit behind, as are most international airports in the U.S. Our demand to Europe has nearly fully recovered, but Asia demand is still down significantly. And having that piece missing from your portfolio has us down, I would say, 10%, maybe below 2019 levels. That was for calendar year 2022. And we're anticipating a near full recovery by the end of this year.
Absolutely. I guess now that China has reopened, it's hopefully going to come back very soon.
We're hoping we get that missing piece back to our, to our map.
Now tell me about your catchment area in a nutshell. How is it that you sell yourself to your airlines?
So our catchment area is really the entire Washington DC Metropolitan area. So Dulles Airport is located in Northern Virginia, about half an hour's drive from the city center in Washington DC. So we really look at that entire catchment, DC proper, Maryland areas in like Montgomery County and so on, and then all of Northern Virginia as our primary catchment. When we talk to an international airline, we expand that a bit, and we realize that people would drive a greater distance for a nonstop international flight. So in those instances, we'll include some more of kind of the northern suburbs in Maryland in our catchment area, because we realize although those passengers may live closer to another airport, they'll drive to Dulles for the nonstop international flights. But on a domestic standpoint, because the airports up in Baltimore have substantial service, we realize they won't drive to Dulles as much, so we don't include them in our catchment when talking to domestic airlines.
I see. So you're positioning yourself more as a point-to-point kind of airport then?
I mean, really, when it comes to that catchment of just our local passengers, Dulles is a hub for United Airlines. So if we're talking to a Star Alliance carrier, we're able to tout that flow that they can get, passengers connecting from United from all over the U.S., Canada, Latin America, Caribbean, and so on to feed their flight.
Yeah.
And then out of DCA, it's a slot-controlled airport, so we really don't do much to convince airlines to add flights there because they can't.
Now, have you noticed any changes in the passengers that are coming through your airport and their expectations of you since the pandemic?
The only expectation changes really are the way passengers use the airport. We've seen our passengers using the parking garages increasing substantially. Passengers using TNCs, Ubers, and Lyft of that nature. There was a huge growth in that year over year prior to the pandemic. And now that's kind of leveled off. And we think that may be people being kind of wary to be near strangers in a confined vehicle more than they need to be. So they'll take their own vehicle to the airport versus an Uber or TNC. And of course, cleanliness and sanitation are always far more important now than I think they ever were before. And customers really notice that. Having the ability to have hand sanitizer everywhere and optional masks if they want to wear them and all those things, I think really mean a lot.
So you think that will have a lasting impact going forward, and is your airports going to kind of keep these measures in place?
Yes, as long as customers demand them, we'll obviously provide them to them. I guess my time will tell to see how long. Everyone seems to have a short memory with things like this. So 5 years from now, people may not remember what the pandemic was.
Yeah.
But at the moment, we're there to give people what they want, keep them safe.
And what is your passenger mix between business and leisure?
It's slightly more leisure focused now than it was before the pandemic, but it's still, it's predominantly leisure. I would say it's 2/3 leisure, 1/3 business. Right now, as opposed to pre-pandemic, it was probably more 55-45 leisure versus business split. But the business travel that is traveling, which is a good portion of it, is paying close to the fares they were before. So we're seeing revenues where they need to be, and airlines returning the profitability that they need to be at to be able to give us the service that we were hoping to get.
Fantastic. Now, does SAF come up for discussion with your airlines? Are they specifically looking for airports that can accommodate, SAF storage and supply?
It is starting to come up in our discussions. I think it's too early on yet because there haven't been there's so many different standards that we know will end up coming out in future years that haven't been completely defined at the moment. So right now the questions are more along the lines of, do you have a plan to accommodate it to some degree? Not does it need to be 70-30 split or 80-20 or whatever it may be. It's just making sure that we're thinking about the long-term ramifications of being able to provide it, and that is something we're focusing on heavily, because we have a fuel farm and we have fuel pits and hydrants for the existing jet fuel. So now when you have to add SAF to the mix, the infrastructure may have to change. There's a lot of things that we'll have to work on that may have longer lead times. So we're working with our airlines and finding out what are their expectations in the future so that we can start the pre-planning to meet those expectations today.
Now, I noticed that your job title is Air Service Development and Retention. How do you work to retain the airlines once you have them?
So that's a big part of our airport, because we realize it's one thing to go out and get the airline to come to your airport, but then if they're not successful and they leave, that's bad for you, it's bad for them, and nobody wins. So we want to not only attract airlines to our market, but we want them to be able to stay and be successful for a long period of time. So we retain them we have a marketing program. It's a cooperative marketing program where all the airlines, whether they have new services or existing services, where we're able to provide them matching funds for marketing and of their flights. So you can be an existing carrier that hasn't added any service, you're just continuing to fly what you've always flown, and you can qualify, as can any other carrier in your situation, for a certain amount of money every year, where we'll match 50 cents on the dollar of what you spend to market the or advertise the flight. We also have landing fee waiver programs that encourage incremental growth, but it's the same route. Maybe you've added a second frequency in a route you already flew once a day. We'll give you landing fee waivers for that second flight. So ways to try to incentivize small, minor growth with our existing carriers while providing them that marketing support to keep what they have doing well. And when carriers tell us a flight is not doing as well as they would like, there's a lot of in-kind things that we can do through our own marketing department that don't cost us anything. Our existing marketing channels, website, social media, and so on, to try to get the message out a little bit and give it a little jump start so that the public knows this flight is out there and how to book it.
How long do airlines give a route once they've started it to kind of decide if they're going to continue with it? Is it 1 year or?
Yeah, I think it depends on the airline.
Yeah.
I know domestic carriers historically had a shorter leash on these things. They would give it kind of like one season to see how it would work. I know a lot of foreign airlines say, well, the first season is only so much, but you need to have that second season to really know. So it really depends on the airline. I guess some airlines will give it a few months, others will give it a few years.
Yeah.
So it really kind of depends on that airline strategy.
So when you talk about a season, that's 3 or 4 months, I assume?
Yeah, I
or?
guess when you look at the IATA summer or winter. Yeah,
Yeah.
so either if it's a summer seasonal, like a European route that maybe only flies in the summer, a lot of airlines will say, well, we'll give it that first season, and then with the second season, and then we'll determine, as opposed to some airlines, domestically will say, well, it's got 4 months to either make it or break it, kind of thing. So.
Yeah. Wow. And how long does it take, say, for example, if you're here today at the Routes Conference and you're speaking with a new airline, how long will it be until the new route comes to fruition?
It could be anywhere from 2 days to 20 years.
Wow.
Some of the airlines we'll be meeting with here, we've talked to them many, many times in the past, and we'll probably talk to them many, many times in the future before the route comes to fruition. And then other airlines, you show them the pitch, their growth strategy lines up with what you're trying to do, and they have that airplane available, and the announcement is made, a couple months later, or even, a couple weeks later. So it really depends. It's like dating, right? Some people find their mate and get married within a month.
Yeah.
And other people date for 30 years and never find somebody. Air service is the same way. It's a very wide spectrum of successful or successes or failures.
I love that analogy. Now, are there any big wins that you've had in your career that you're particularly proud of? You worked on an airline for like 10 years and they finally agreed, or?
At MWAA, we're fortunate enough to be one of the largest, kind of representing Washington DC, one of the largest metropolitan areas in the U.S. So we have quite a few air service wins that happen on an annual basis. I wasn't directly involved in this one, but it was just announced today. WestJet will be starting service to Calgary in Canada in June through Thames weekly service. So I'm very proud that we were able to get that one across the line. Like I said, I wasn't directly involved in it, but I did help with some of the analysis kind of behind the scenes. We have Play Airlines that's starting in April. That was one of my personal wins that I kind of helped significantly getting that one across the line. They announced that back in October, November timeframe, and it starts this April. And that's big for us because trying to get more international low-cost service is one of our main focuses, and having Play come in with service to Reykjavik with their low-cost model will not only help us stimulate more demand to Iceland, but their connections onto Europe will really open up a lot of European markets to travelers who couldn't afford to fly to them before.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned a few of those with regards to WestJet, but are there any other exciting developments that you want to share with us?
No, nothing nothing that we could share with the public.
Yeah.
There's always a lot of irons in the fire, but until the airline announces it, we don't let anybody know it's in the works.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, we'll watch this space then. Finally, what is the biggest challenge facing route developers at this moment?
I would say it's the pilot shortage, at least here in the U.S. I know other parts of the world may not have this issue, but in the U.S. it's the pilot shortage. Every airline has aircraft that they would like to be flying or like to be flying more, but they just don't have the crew time available to keep that airplane in the air as much as they would like. So when that happens, there's a whole bunch of routes that can't be operated because there just aren't pilots to fly them. So I think that's really the limiting factor. If you could eliminate that crew shortage, there's probably 5 to 10% more air service that would exist that doesn't exist at the moment, at least within the United States. So seeing ways that the airlines can solve that, I think, would be really helpful to getting a lot of those routes that we talk to an airline about, and they'll say, yeah, we agree with you. This is a great opportunity. We'd love to be flying it, but we don't have any pilots. And that conversation happens a lot more than we would like. So hopefully, in the coming years, that problem will be solved. We'll be able to secure those routes.
Do you think aviation has lost some of its glamour and its edge?
I think so. I mean, you think back to like the 60s, and being an airline pilot or a flight attendant was a super glamorous kind of job. And now, some people refer to it as like an overglorified bus driver, which I don't agree with. But the fact that I hear people who aren't in the aviation industry make that such a statement, it's unfortunate, but you're right. I think it's taken away some of the glamour that it used to have, back in the day. But at the same time, more people fly now than ever before. So although it may not be considered as glamorous, it was only glamorous back in the day because hardly anybody can afford to fly. Now a lot of people can afford to fly. So it may not be glamorous, but there's a lot more people in our airport as a result of the affordability.
Absolutely. Tom, that was my final question. Thank you so much.
Thanks.